I have no use for a woman who can't have children. I'm marrying this woman and I'm going to have such beautiful children with her.
I demand that any incompetent wife in childbearing divorce my son. He deserves so much better than an infertile whore like you. And this young lady is going to be an infinitely more capable wife who will give me the grandchildren I hope to see soon. We will take this house and you will leave us in peace. Unless you want to stay with us by paying us rent and by becoming our lowly housekeeper. You really don't know anything, do you? I decided to tell these people floating around in their stupid delusions of grandeur and splendor the all too shocking reality of the situation. Ignorance truly is bliss, but only until its nemesis, truth, descends from the heights of goodness to make things right. My name is Gail, and I'm a 38-year-old office worker. I've been married for 10 years to my husband, Jay. Unfortunately, even after a full decade since tying the knot, we have no children yet. I've always wanted kids, but I'd always thought my future husband and I would act on it when the timing was right. That was the initial plan with Jay, too, the only problem being that we've completely missed that timing. If you're wondering why, hold your horses, I'm getting there. Another dream I always had was of building a house. More specifically, I had always dreamed of building a house without having to take out a loan from the bank. So ever since I was hired into the company I now work for, I was working my hardest, as well as making lots of compromises in order to save up as much as I could. I worked for a large company and had a relatively decent salary, even at the beginning. I didn't have children at the time, nor did I have a commitment to another person as I do now. So I was willing to put in more effort and time to work, extra hours, work on weekends and holidays, and successful business trips have all paid off in the end. I'm positive that all my hard work was why I earned the position of section chief. The most important thing I keep in mind when I do most things in life was efficiency. And a lot of my decisions took this factor into careful consideration. I was often able to go home on time without working extra hours because I was efficient at my job. After I married Jay, I was also in charge of the housework. And although it was difficult to work and then go home and take care of the home, I became more efficient at working both and got used to it within a month. As for my husband, Jay worked for a small company, but he was never really able to keep a job, and instead worked one job for perhaps a couple of months before quitting and applying for another. It's actually been a while since he's had a full-time job, so him getting a position in any company is obviously out of the question. More recently, he'd been working part-time and moving from place to place more often than usual. I couldn't think of how many times he had changed jobs in the 10 years of our marriage. But I figured that since I was making more than enough money to live a good life as a married couple, it wouldn't matter much if he didn't make much. We didn't share our income, so we were both using the money we made for our own purposes. I had been saving up every month since I started working in order to build a house, and I had finally reached the amount of money I'd wanted to save to realize that dream. Since saving money is also my hobby, in a sense, I had accumulated considerable money. I didn't have children yet, but I wasn't too old to have any. I decided to build a house to have a bright future as a family, considering we would have children one day. When I talked to my husband about my dream, he was a little worried.
I don't have any money. What am I supposed to do?
Oh, don't worry about it, honey. I have some money saved so we can borrow a little as a small loan and build a nice house for our nice family. My husband's face lit up when I told him that. I guess he wanted to build a house too. We had been living together in a cheap apartment in order to save money, so I couldn't blame him if he wanted to live in a bigger house. We decided to build a house. But because my husband had no credit score due to the fact he was moving from one job to another, he could not get a mortgage. So I had to be the one to take one out. Jay, a proud man in his own way, said he would pay me back all of the mortgage. I thought it was a nice gesture on his part, so I asked him to make monthly deposits into my bank account. With the help of my parents, the plan was quite astonishing in the sense I was going to be able to pay off the mortgage in full in no more than 5 years. We only borrowed $50,000 for the mortgage. The rest of the money came from my parents and my own savings. I felt sorry that they had to pay for our house, but my parents said they would help us as much as they could because if anyone had a big mortgage or loan to pay back at a young age, saving up wouldn't be possible. So, we moved into our newly built house after some time. My husband was thrilled about how it turned out and thanked me every day. He indeed was grateful. I could see it in his eyes. But he never once paid me back any money for the mortgage. I knew he didn't have much money in the first place, so I didn't really mind, but I found myself wondering where in the world his manly pride went. And then, after we built the house, my mother-in-law, Mrs. Xander, often came over to our home. It's not that my mother-in-law and I had a bad relationship, but she was one of those people I didn't want to have anything to do with if I didn't have to. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. Whenever she came over to my home, she would say something along the lines of, "Hey, are you gonna give me any grandchildren yet?" Mrs. Xander would always pester me about not having any children just yet. "You know, I haven't had any yet, and everyone around me, all my friends and my neighbors, is bragging about how many grandchildren they have. I always feel so left out, and I feel so miserable. When are you planning to do that? How long have you been married again?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Xander, I can't make the decision of conceiving a child on my own. You'll have to ask Jay if you want some answers." "I can't ask Jay that." "When do you think you're going to have one? You're so close to the end of your life as a woman. I suggest you stop thinking and start acting quickly, dear." Yes, ma'am." What the hell did she mean by close to the end of your life as a woman? I couldn't get that strangely ominous line out of my head. Jay once told me that she often got into trouble with her neighbors because she would blabber on and on about her own feelings without considering the feelings of others. I think I finally understand what exactly he meant by that. What can't be done can't be done, so it can't be helped. And my husband was often coming home late these days because he says work was making him pretty busy. I never understood why he came home so late if he didn't have a great full-time job. But when I say something to him, he says sarcastically,
Oh, I get it. You're a woman working for this large conglomerate. And condescending little office men like working for a small subsidiary company is your cup of tea with honey biscuits, isn't it?
I couldn't say anything back because they would take anything I said the wrong way. I was worried about him having an affair with another woman, and you can't blame me for suspecting that. 1, he was coming home unnaturally late for someone working a physical job in a factory. And 2, I had no idea if work was even what he was doing during the time. But I knew he just didn't have the money to be able to cheat on me, so that suspicion lasted a brief moment before it was quickly expunged. But the fact remained. My husband was coming home late. And that meant we had less time for us as a couple. We could never have sex, let alone get me pregnant, despite my efforts to make it happen. And yet, Mrs. Xander never ceases to pester me about it. And with every passing day, it became tougher and tougher to endure. When I tell my husband about it, he cooperates for the night, but the timing was never right, and I never got pregnant. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye as we continued to do this. I was able to pay off the mortgage successfully. Jay did not pay even a single penny in the end, but I told him the mortgage had been paid. Then his attitude, along with his mother's, changed drastically. The first major change was that Mrs. Xander suddenly came to live with us. without me knowing about the plan. One day when I came home from work, my husband and mother-in-law greeted me on my return.
Welcome home, honey. So listen, starting today, Mom here is going to be living with us. You don't mind if she does, do you?
Thank you for giving me such a beautiful house. Wait, what? What do you mean?
You know I'm an only child, right? I never knew Dad, and caring for Mom is my most important job.
Like I said, I'd never heard anything about her moving in with us once the house was built. So I was evidently surprised. But there was no way I could tell Mrs. Xander, who had already moved most of her stuff in, to go back home, so I had no choice but to allow her to move in with us. After that, I had to endure my mother-in-law's tormenting every day, and it just got worse with every passing hour, it seemed. When I came home from work, the same goddamn nagging. Have you finished cooking dinner yet? You still need to finish cleaning the bathroom. Just because you work doesn't mean you can slack off in the housework, dear. Keep your room clean too, alright? And that was but the tip of the iceberg. The worst part was that she always acted as the innocent angel, and she never said anything in front of my husband. But every time we were alone, just the two of us, she would always have something to complain about. And even though Mrs. Xander had moved in with us, Jay still didn't come home until quite late at night. He used to come home before the sun went down, but lately he came home in the very early morning, zonks out on the couch, wakes up from my footsteps coming down the stairs, takes a bath, and goes to work. I barely had a chance to talk to him anymore by that point. And my mother-in-law, who must be aware of the situation, of all people, never failed to disappoint when it came to pushing me to have grandchildren. I don't understand how she could think we could possibly have a child under these circumstances. I just didn't get it. Does she really think a stork will bring her a child in a little white bag of cloth or something? A few days later, I came home from work to find an unfamiliar pair of shoes lined up at the door along with Mrs. Xander's shoes and Jay's. I thought it was a door-to-door saleswoman who had dropped by to perhaps negotiate a deal. So I quietly entered the house. I made my way to the living room, where my eyes locked with those of my husband, who was sitting on the big couch with his arm around a young woman. His body language suggested he thought he was very important in that moment, and it was as though everyone was waiting for me. He beckoned to me like I was a servant to His Majesty.
Divorce me, please. I have no use for a woman who can't have children. I am marrying this woman, and I'm going to have such beautiful children with her. You have no place here, and I want to divorce you.
I demand that any incompetent wife in childbearing divorce my son. He deserves so much better than an infertile whore like you. And this young lady is going to be an infinitely more capable wife who will give me the grandchildren I hope to see soon. We will take this house, and you will leave us in peace. Unless you want to stay with us by paying us rent and becoming our lowly housekeeper. My mother-in-law presented me with the divorce documents. I was stunned because I didn't understand what had just happened. And then the woman whom Jay seemed to be having an affair with laughed and said, "You know, I'm pregnant, unlike you, you infertile hag." She informed me of her pregnancy with a proud, condescending tone. To that squeaky, high-pitched voice of hers, she told me that her relationship with Jay had been going on for a year, and that the pregnancy had been strategically planned. The plan was to be carried out just as I finished paying off the mortgage. "Jay says he can't live without me, so I'd like you to end it with him, okay? But just like Mrs. Xander said, you can stay on as a housekeeper if you want to. But we expect you to pay for your share of water, electricity, gas, and everything else you may be needing from our commodities." I had absolutely no idea what these people are talking about, and my mind was blank. I put this house in my name, and I personally made the payments. I took out the mortgage, and Jay promised he would pay me back. He never did.
Why don't you just change the name to mine?
That's a great idea. You seem so miserable, Gail. Honey. I understand you don't want to give up the house and your darling husband, but give in. There's no way out of this. As for the division of property, I'll just take the house and I'll do you the favor of claiming nothing else. I'll feel sorry for you if I left you penniless and homeless after all. Oh, Jay, darling, this is no time to be gallant. In times like these, you just have to shun them firmly and completely. 3 people floating around in their stupid delusions of grandeur and splendor. These bird brains really didn't know anything. You guys don't know anything. When I said that, they looked at me and laughed hysterically. They probably think I'm a sore loser, but they couldn't be further from the truth. I was just about to destroy them with my knowledge of how the law in society works. More specifically, I was going to tell them about the division of property regarding houses. I went over this very thoroughly with the bank when I first asked for a mortgage 5 years before. Since the house is in my name and has been paid for almost entirely with money I had saved since before I got married to Jay, in addition to the money my parents graciously offered, it was not eligible for division of property. Furthermore, there was no property division whatsoever because the couple's joint savings amounted to exactly 0. They had to live on Jay's savings, as well as Mrs. Xander's, and the savings of the woman whom Jay was having an affair with, whose name was Opal, by the way. If you want to live in this house, I will sell it to you then. Then you can repurchase it yourselves. Then you can keep the house just as you hoped you would. As I laughed, Jay and Mrs. Xander finally seemed to understand the gravity of the situation.
Wait, hold on just a minute. Are you saying I'll be left with nothing?
Pretty much, yeah. Jay buries his face in his hands once he's heard these words uttered. I laugh at my husband's cartoon-like depression. He reminded me of Tom, the cat, when he discovered that sexy female cat had cheated on him and cast him aside like a piece of trash. Mrs. Xander was also looking at me, but it was as though she was trying to look through me, trying to figure out what to do. And then I remembered an additional detail that could make things more interesting, and decided to present it for show and tell. I just thought of something that you'll have at the end of all this.
Oh? And what's that?
A lot of debt.
We don't have any debts, Gil. Isn't that right, Mom?
No, we don't, honey. We don't have any debt. I'm sure of it. Not yet, you mean? But I'm going to demand alimony. The cause of us divorcing is because of your infidelity. And then they both kneeled on the floor, begging for my reconsideration. I don't have any savings, Gail, my dear. I depended on you for my life expenses. So I spent the money I had on cards because I didn't think I'd need it.
I don't have any either, Gail. I spent all the little money I had on Opal here. And you know I don't make that much money in the first place.
The 2 slime bags with their pathetic excuses. I didn't give a good goddamn about their situations. They brought them upon themselves, and fixing them was none of my business. And Jay, my darling husband, if you never had much money, why did you choose to have an affair with a materialistic gold digger and divorce me? Perhaps he didn't think that despite introducing his lover to me in person, there would be alimony to be demanded anyway. I'm going to charge you alimony there too, Opal. Wait, what? Why me? You knew I existed as Jay's wife, and yet you still went on with the affair. You're an accomplice in his crime, and the law states you can be penalized too. But I'm pregnant, Miss Gale. Are you seriously going to ask for alimony despite this? And what was she talking about? How could a functioning member of society think that she would be immune to any demands for alimony if they had an affair with someone else's spouse and had a baby with them? Honestly, the idiocy of these three blockheads knew no bounds. And also, I must apologize, for I've recorded every single thing we've just said to each other ever since I got home. We record them at work too, for the sake of making records of conversations. Good thing I'm a creature of habit.
No frickin' way. What am I supposed to do?
I thought I told you already, Mr. Xander. Borrow money. Buy the house back, pay me the alimony you legally owe me, and then you can enjoy your life in this beautiful house. Can't we come to some other arrangement? You don't have to get divorced if we can't handle it. Let's all just live in the house for now as we discuss a compromise. I burst out laughing at my mother-in-law's outrageous suggestion. All three of them fell silent, most likely horrified at the fact I was laughing like a madman. After wiping away tears, I finally said, I'll send you guys the papers through my lawyer, so I'll just keep these divorce documents for now. With that as my parting shot, I left the house. Since the house is in my name, they couldn't sell it without my permission, which, needless to say, they'll never obtain. I went back home during my next holiday and had the movers move all my stuff. Most of the furniture and appliances inside the house I bought with my money, so the house was almost completely empty by the time the movers had moved everything out. My husband was there at the time, so I told him, the house is already on the market, you know? The auction is next week, so I suggest you pack up what little stuff you have and leave within the next few days. And Mrs. Xander, too, obviously. If you don't leave, I'll call the police and report you for trespassing.
We used to love each other. How could you do this to me?
Because you betrayed me. That's all I said, and I left the property, never to return. Later on, my divorce with Jay was officially finalized, and of course, I succeeded in evicting them all from the house. How do I know this? Because all their belongings were reported to be gone by the time the house was sold. The alimony from both of them was paid in one lump sum. My lawyer said they called every day to negotiate a lower price for the alimony, but of course, all of the pleas were coldly rejected, as they should have been. I demanded $60,000 from my husband and $40,000 from his lover, Opal, making the grand total of $100,000 from both of them. Soon thereafter, since my husband had a habit of moving from one job to another, he quit his job again because he thought the salary was too low, and he couldn't make enough money to pay off his debt. Then he got a new job, and although the salary was better than his previous job, it still implied he had to struggle to keep afloat. I recently heard a rumor that he quit his job too because the salary was just not enough, and now he's working a questionable job. I don't know if he's making good money with this job, but the fact is, it's a shady job is clear. It's not the kind of job a father with a kid on the way would willingly choose to support his family. Opal is also in debt, and looks like she left the child with her mother-in-law, the glamorous Mrs. Xander, right after they were born. She is now working to make ends meet. Mrs. Xander is stressed about not having money and about raising a child despite her financial situation. She and Jay seem to be fighting every day because the stress of the debt is taking a toll on them. But they have no choice but to live with the three of them and the child, so they are trying to cooperate. At least they still have some humanity, but it's a shame because this is the child that Jay had always wanted, and the grandchild Mrs. Xander had always wanted. I hope they teach it that this is what awaits one that willingly betrayed someone else. I decided to repurchase a new house because I had enough money even after I paid off the mortgage. Of course, I had the 100 grand in alimony, and this time I wanted to live with my parents, so I got them to help me. I bought a beautiful house that was on sale this time, so the price was fairly less compared to before. My parents were happy to live with me, but Dad laughed, saying,
Your matchmaking days are still getting further away, sweetie.
I'm happy to be back in a family environment where we can joke around like that again. For the time being, I'm going to work hard at my job, just as I always did. Perhaps I hadn't learned my lesson about marrying someone, since I do hope to one day marry a good man with good intentions. But I'll be faithful to my happiness and keep walking forward to make me and my family live the fulfilling life they deserve.